started in the 11th grade.
And don't know fractions?
Don't know basic math.
Wow. Call me tomorrow. I want to talk to you about these school closings too, Kelly. As soon as I see your name on the board, I want to come because I want you to finish about what's happening. They closed 54 schools in Chicago. Let me take my exit here. Don't forget, folk already on the road, you need to be here. If you can't get here Wednesday through Friday, be here Saturday, but be part of the National Action Network Convention, especially the historic end on Saturday when we measure the movement. You can go to nationalactionnetwork.net, nationalactionnetwork.net, or call right now, 1-877-626-4651, 1-877-626-4651. Let me thank my executive producer, Fatim Muhammad, my technical producer, Lee Majors. Let me remind you tonight and every night, 6 o'clock Eastern Time, 5 o'clock Central Time. I'm live on MSNBC on Politics Nation with Al Sharpton, MSNBC. Remember, whatever you do, wherever you go, however you feel, tell somebody. Reverend Al told you personally, keep it real, keep it real, keep it real.
Sweet potato pie. Even the keenest taste buds will tell you the best food on the planet. Large enough to serve you and small enough to know you. So get to Henry's at 5431 Indian Head Highway, Oxon Hill, Maryland, or give us a call at 301-749-6856.
Soul food. Henry's soul food. What we need. Soul food.
Welcome to the Armstrong Williams Show, brought to you by Golden Crust Bakery, the fastest growing Caribbean-owned franchise in the United States. Golden Crust is committed to the delivery of quality food and excellent customer service. Visit them today at goldencrustbakery.com. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Armstrong Williams Show. Thank you so much for joining us. Building Home is an innovative biography that weaves together three engrossing stories. It is one part corporate history, using the evolution of mortgage finance as a way of understanding larger dynamics in the nation's political economy. It is also part urban history, since the extraordinary success of the savings and loan business in Los Angeles reflects much of the cultural and economic history of Southern California. Finally, it is the personal story of one of the nation's most successful entrepreneurs of the managed economy, Howard Fieldstad Abrahamson. Eric John Abrahamson deftly connects these three strands as he chronicles Abrahamson's rise against the background of the post-World War II housing boom and the growth of Los Angeles during the same period. Eric, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Armstrong. I'm glad to be here.
Are you related to Mr. Abrahamson?
No, our names are very close. In fact, my editor, when I first brought her this project, said, well, you're going to have to change your name if you want to do this book. But we have no relationship. Mine is Abrahamson, and his is Amundsen.
Yes. So, this is interesting. I must tell you, building home, the politics of the American dream, and it's so relevant to today. Why this story?
Well, I got interested in this story because I started my career working at the Department of Housing and Urban Development back in the 1970s, and was really fascinated by the relationship between government and private enterprise in promoting home ownership in America. And, it is a long history going all the way back to our founding fathers, and sometimes it's worked really well and sometimes it hasn't. And so it was a fascinating story for me to get into, and Howard Amundsen seemed to be kind of a great vehicle to tell the story.
How did he get started? And just talk about how vastly different the market is today than it was, and how the laws and the barriers are so different.
Yeah, he's a really interesting character. In 1966, he was probably one of the richest men in the United States, and yet, nobody really knows who he was. He got his start in Nebraska. He was born in 1906, and, his father really doted on him and taught him the insurance business at an early age, so he was working in that business as a teenager. And then when his father died in 1925, when Amundsen was just 19 years old, he was devastated. And he moved to Southern California to finish going to college. But, like a lot of entrepreneurs that we think of, he started his business, and while he was still in college, he opened his own insurance brokerage. And, right from the beginning, he was kind of an innovator. In those days, for example, insurance companies didn't want to write insurance on an empty house, on a foreclosed home, because they thought it would be too much of a risk. But Amundsen realized that actually the banks that took the house back would want to take good care of it. So he wrote those policies. He was the only one that was doing it, and during the Depression, he just made money hand over fist. In 1933, he became a millionaire, and you think about it, that's the lowest point in the Depression. And after the war, after World War II, he realized that there was going to be tremendous demand for home ownership, and especially in Los Angeles, because the city had grown tremendously during the war. And so he began to buy savings and loans, and in those days, nobody paid attention to savings and loans. Most of the mortgage lending in California and in other parts of the country was handled either by mortgage brokers who worked with insurance companies or by banks, and and so it was not, savings and loans were kind of a small business. And one of the things that's interesting is that up until the time of the New Deal, most Americans, if they bought a home, they saved all their life to be able to afford to buy a home. They borrowed money, if they borrowed at all, then they borrowed it from a relative or maybe from a commercial retail firm, somebody who already made a lot of money. Most of them, middle-class Americans, didn't go to banks to get their money. And one of the things that was revolutionized by the New Deal era policies and the creation of the Federal Housing Administration and the Federal Home Loan Bank was that the federal government began to offer mortgage insurance. And that gave bankers a lot more confidence in their ability to lend. And they also helped to stabilize the 30-year mortgage so that people could plan on paying it back over a long time. And that was hugely successful, but it didn't really kick in until the post-war years. And Amundsen, his genius was he realized all these laws were on the books, but they hadn't really been maximized for the entrepreneur. And so he stepped in the 1950s and built a huge organization.
Audience, this is an amazing story. Building Home, Howard F. Armstrong and the Politics of the American Dream, written by Eric John Abrahamson, no relation, but very similar in names. I tell you what is fascinating is how with so much is the things that were going on during that time, from the Great Depression, the World Wars, from his father that was passed on to his son. This is such an innovative biography that weaves together three soul engrossing stories. I mean, it's part corporate and industrial history, because you use the evolution of mortgage finance as a way to understand larger dynamics in the nation's political economy. And it is also urban history since the extraordinary success of the savings and loan business in L.A. And it also is a personal story, a biography of one of the nation's most successful entrepreneurs in what you would call a managed economy.
Right. Now, let me talk a little bit about that. It's an interesting thing. You know, one of the things that, if we go back to the 1920s, when as the American economy was becoming increasingly complex, people like Herbert Hoover understood that there needed to be more coordination in the economy. Hoover hoped that industries could do that together. In other words, kind of self-regulate and work together to put the structures in place that would benefit everybody. And there was a feeling that with the Depression, some of Hoover's strategies hadn't worked. And in some ways, Roosevelt built on Hoover's strategies to put into place a more directed economy through the mechanism of the New Deal. And the things that were done during the New Deal were sort of reinforced then by World War II, where because of the urgency of the war and because you had to really directly manage the production of everything you needed to be able to fight the war and make sure that you had people in place not only in the armed services but also in war industries, the government's role became even stronger. But one of the things that really happened that's interesting is through that experience of the war, a lot of people like Amundsen spent the war working for the Navy in Washington, D.C. because he'd had this executive experience. And so he spent much of his time in D.C. making sure that there were parts and equipment needed to build aircraft around the country. And one of the things he saw was the ways in which people who had these aircraft companies, McDonnell Douglas, for example, were working with the government to achieve the wartime goals. And when the war ended, a lot of those people left government service and they went back into the private sector, but they had a much different attitude than maybe people do today, where they understood that business and government could cooperate to achieve public policy goals. So for Amundsen, the public policy goal, which had been articulated for generations by Hoover and Roosevelt and presidents ever since, was to increase home ownership in America. And one of the things I found interesting in writing the book is that there are many times when Amundsen would be working with the regulators, either in California or in Washington, on issues related to the marketplace for the mortgage market. And there were times when he pushed them because he wanted something for his business in order to make it grow. And other times when they needed something because, for example, a savings loan was failing in Los Angeles and people who had their money in that savings loan would be hurt if it failed, and they would turn to him to help bail it out and stabilize it. So it was a very cooperative relationship between business and government during those years. And one of the things you find is that as you get into the late 1950s and early 1960s, the value that was placed on stability in the market begins to change. And more people are worried more about efficiency, and that markets have to be efficient rather than stable. And that's really the beginning of what becomes the movement for deregulation, which takes 40 years to unfold.
John Abrahamson, Building Home, story about Howard Armstrong and the politics of the American dream. What about today's housing market? What would he think about it?
Say bye-bye burgers, pass on the pizza, forget the francs. Anytime is party time. Discover Golden Cross's authentic Jamaican-style patties. Beef, chicken, vegetables, soya, spinach, and shrimp. Feast on our great taste sensations. Jerk chicken, oxtail, sliced fish, and much more. Savor the taste of the Caribbean. Only at a Golden Cross near you. A family tradition since 1949. GoldenCrossBakery.com.
For more information on the Armstrong Williams Show, please visit our new website at www.rightsidewire.com. There you can find his syndicated column archive, view live streams, and get your favorite conservative pundits' views on the current issues affecting the American people. From building wealth to foreign policy, Stay connected with Armstrong Williams and his colleagues at the all-new www.rightsidewire.com.
Hi, this is Armstrong Williams. What does it mean to be conservative? Freedom of speech, freedom of free enterprise, freedom of assembly, less government, less taxes. As a matter of fact, a flat tax. Everyone should pay proportional tax. It doesn't matter whether you make 100 million or 10,000. Everyone should pay their 10%. Everyone should have something at stake in this American economy. I'm Armstrong Williams expressing what we mean by conservative traditional value.
Does your school, team, church, or charity need a new fundraiser? Do you need to work out of your home or part-time? Are you a small business that can use an additional revenue stream? Then you need Yellow Llama. Do you need affordable web services or tools to enhance your existing business? Are you a graphic artist who wants to create a revenue stream with your art but not get ripped off? Then go to www.yellowllama.com.
America must change course if we hope to survive and save the American dream for our children and grandchildren. How do we fix Social Security and Medicare? How do we cut government spending? How do we reform health care? How do we simplify the tax code? The Heritage Foundation has a bold plan that tackles these tough problems using common sense solutions that leave partisan politics on the sidelines. Find out how we can save the American dream at savingthedream.org, paid for by the Heritage Foundation.
Hi, this is Armstrong Williams with an opportunity to own a piece of paradise in Nassau, Bahamas. Spectacular land prices, 8,000 square feet, 20,000 square feet lot, affordable prices, hilltop properties with views of the magnificent sea. Just call 242-677-3120 or 3121 or go to info@rightsidewire.com and leave your information.
Where heads of state, sports, entertainment, and political celebrities meet. You're listening to Armstrong Williams.
So talk about the housing market, building the home from the days of Mr. Abrahamson, Eric, to where we are today, and what lessons should we learn?
Well, one of the things that's interesting is that Howard Abrahamson, we think a lot of times of entrepreneurs as people who are willing to take risk, and we associate entrepreneurship with risk. But Abrahamson spent his whole life trying to mitigate risk and recognized that he could make money if he could diminish risk. And one of the reasons he bet so heavily on home ownership was he thought that, people would go through a lot before they would give up their homes. And so that was a good bet. But one of the things that, was a dominant characteristic of the housing market of the 1950s and 1960s was that there was a strong correlation between the person that was underwriting a mortgage and the borrower. They were tightly connected. And I think one of the things that happened with the whole movement towards securitization that began in the 1980s is that we attenuated the relationship between those who were making the loans and those who were borrowing. And when we did that, we made it harder for them to assess the level of risk. And I think one of the things we're all struggling with right now is how do we get back to a more careful relationship between those people who are actually making the loan and those who have to pay it back.
I don't think we can get back to those days.
You don't think so?
No, but you correct me if you think I'm wrong.
Well, I think we can, and I think one of the most important ways is that we have to come up with a system that leaves lenders with carrying more of the risk for the loans that they make. And I think that was a critical part of the system in those days. I think, we will still need the kind of liquidity that comes from securitization and from a larger global financial market, but I think we still need to have a system that leaves lenders responsible for the risk that they undertake.
So let me, in the book, talk about which I thought was a fascinating chapter, the home and the state, the influence of the state.
Sure. one of the things that is kind of interesting is that the savings and loan industry prior to the Great Depression was really a kind of mom-and-pop cooperative mutual system. People in a community would get together, they would pool their savings. Anyone who's seen the movie It's a Wonderful Life remembers the speech by Jimmy Stewart talking about the fact that the money that people have saved is not actually in the institution, it's in the homes of the people who live in the community. But many of those savings and loans struggled during the Depression, and one of the things that happened with the creation of the Federal Home Loan Bank was a new federal system that required that pushed most savings and loans to become mutual and federal. And with the mutual, it meant that there was no one who actually owned the business and could make money on it, except in California and a couple of other places. California had an old law in the books that allowed you to actually own a savings and loan, and that was something that Howard Amundsen recognized. And he also recognized that as part of the legislation that came out of the New Deal era, savings and loans had been given a competitive advantage over banks in the mortgage market. In those days, most people who saved for their retirement, they put their money into a savings account, either at a bank or a savings and loan. And savings and loans could pay a little more interest because the government regulated the bank's interest. So he saw that as an advantage to be able to collect capital to work with. And there were also advantages on the lending side. He could lend at a higher loan-to-value ratio, which meant he could make a little more money on each loan. So he recognized that the law, the state, had set it up so that savings and loans had an advantage over banks in the market. And that was part of what pushed him to get into it.
What about the toxic loans, the people that qualify for home loans now and who absolutely had no business in owning a home because they couldn't afford it? What about this 100% financing and you have no skin in the game?
Well, I don't think that Amundsen would have wanted that to happen. He believed it was really important that people take responsibility on both sides. I think one of the things that happened was that we built up a strong culture within government and within kind of the body politic for decades, in this belief that home ownership, the American dream, was something we ought to try to extend to everyone. And I think one of the good things to come out of this crisis is we're really rethinking that. Does everyone really need to be a homeowner? Does everyone want to be a homeowner? And I think one of the things that we're also recognizing is that maybe we pushed too hard to extend home ownership to too many people. In 2004, we peaked at about 69% of households in the United States were homeowners. It's fallen since then. It's down to just a little bit over 65% now, after about 4 million foreclosures across the country. But it's still a really high rate, and I think it's going to continue to be an important part of the American dream for some time.
You know what? One of the things I did like about this short of the domestic book, when he lost his brother, talk about that in the book, because I thought that was it showed a lot about who he was, and then they separated 2 weeks later.
Yeah. So Amundsen was married twice. His first wife, Dorothy or Dottie, was a Southern California girl. She worked for David Selznick in Hollywood. She was a glamour girl in a way. But the two of them were very close, and they were married for a long time, didn't have any children until they'd been married for 17 years, and then they had one child, Howard Amundsen Jr. But I think there were pressures on the both of them, and they divorced in the early 1960s. And he divorced right at the time that his brother died. And one of the things that was always very important to Amundsen was family. His two nephews came to work for him and played an important part in his business. He always hoped that his son would grow up to take over his empire, just as his father had coached him in business. But Howard Amundsen Jr., he struggled with Tourette syndrome, and so in his teenage years it was very difficult to imagine that he would be able to take over the empire. So there's a strong kind of father-son story that plays through the whole book, both in the early part for Howard Amundsen and his father, and then for Amundsen and his son, Howard Amundsen Jr.
But they're radically different.
They are. I mean, one had
yeah.
all the business acumen to build a financial empire. Howard Amundsen Jr. struggled with his physical ailment. His father died when he was 18 years old, and he went on to sort of come to terms with not only his own capacities, but then also to really shape his own view, or to develop his own view of his role in the world that was very different from his father's.
What lessons do we learn from that?
Well, I think one of the things that I take away from it, and I've been fascinated by for a long time, is that we tend to think, when we think of business in America, we tend to think of it as being, sort of clinical corporate towers where there are, everyone's a professional. But the reality is that our business system is much more complex and mixed. Family still plays an important part, especially in growing small businesses. And the relationships between family members that cross over into business relationships are really important. Personal relationships are also really important, and that was something that struck home with me. One of the reasons that Howard Amundsen was so successful was he developed very personal relationships with regulators, a couple of them in particular, where they trusted him and he trusted them, and they could find ways to solve problems together. And I think that's an interesting point, is that there was more room for latitude in these personal relationships then than maybe there is now.
I found it interesting that he flirted with the limelight. While he had a powerful intelligence, he had no interest in becoming an academic. He liked theory and wrote speeches and his views on the economy, but he had no desire to become an intellectual leader. Talk about that contrast.
Well, it's interesting because he had a very strong ego. I think, it's tough to become really successful in business without that strong ego. And on occasion, he ventured into the limelight. He was early on in the savings and loan industry. He took a leadership role in the trade association in Los Angeles, but very quickly decided that he didn't want to do that. He got into politics when he was the financial campaign manager for Governor Goodwin Knight when he ran in the 1950s, and famously got into a big fight when Knight wanted to make him chairman of the Republican Party at the time that the Republicans were going to have their national convention in San Francisco in 1956. And Richard Nixon, fearing that maybe Eisenhower might not keep him on the ticket, did not want someone who wasn't loyal to him to be chairman of the California Republican Party. So Nixon fought Knight over Amundsen, and it was a very public battle. And I think, and a lot of what Nixon's friends criticized Amundsen for was his lack of political experience. And I think out of that circumstance, Amundsen came away feeling like he really didn't want to put himself out there where people would be so critical of you. So he withdrew from being visible in politics, but he continued to be very influential, especially in the state legislature and in Washington. And there are stories that he was a major financer for, later, the Speaker of the Assembly in California, Democrat Jesse Unruh.
Well, how does someone go out and get a copy of the book?
Well, you can get a copy of the book from the University of California Press as a publisher. They've got it on their website. Or you can go to any online bookseller or to your local independent bookseller and tell them you'd like to order it.
I cannot thank you enough for this wonderful book. Thank you for joining us, and hopefully we'll have you back again.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be on this show. Thank you very much.
Our pleasure. Coming up next, Dr. Gary Bernard. Don't go away.
Armstrong Williams returns in a moment.
For more information on the Armstrong Williams Show, please visit our new website at www.rightsidewire.com. There you can find his syndicated column archive, view live streams, and get your favorite conservative pundits' views on the current issues affecting the American people. From building wealth to foreign policy, stay connected with Armstrong Williams and his colleagues at the all-new www.rightsidewire.com.
Life is full of unexpected changes. Everyone has potential to do wrong. And when they choose to do it, Contact the Bucksell Group for your private investigation needs. TheBucksellGroup.com or by phone at 202-243-9746. Whether there's an instance of a cheating spouse, child custody, process service, or security, don't continue suspecting. Get closure so that you can move on with your life. Visit TheBucksellGroup.com now or call 202-243-9746. If you think it's happening, it probably is.
To travelers along the road of life who have fallen asleep at the wheel, to the many who woke up in time to avert disaster and get back on the righteous path. For the ones who crashed and survived and now adhere vigilantly to a virtuous and righteous path. Finally, Armstrong Williams' much-anticipated new book, Reawakening Virtues, gives his insights into these daily challenges and much more. Reawakening Virtues is available in bookstores and at Amazon.com.
Join the millions of Americans who pursue one of our country's finest traditions, from hunting to sports shooting. Since 1871, the NRA has grown as a service organization involved in all aspects of shooting sports and is a proud defender of the Bill of Rights. Join today to begin taking advantage of exclusive membership offers and discounts, including up to $25,000 in insurance coverage. Contact the NRA today. Call 1-800-672-3888 or visit nra.org.
Most Americans simply have never been taught the basics of money management, let alone how to secure their financial future. But there is hope. Financial Education and Literacy Advisors, also known as FELA, does what others don't. FELA teaches financial education. If you'd like more information about providing a financial wellness program for your employees, or a credit-bearing college course in personal finance, or other valuable programs, please visit myfela.com. That's myfela.com, or send an email to info@myfela.com.
Elder Chicks is an exciting part of the fastest growing segment of the population. Women in their 70s, 80s, and older who are mastering the art of a senior life. We're no longer unseen and unheard. We're providing role models for each other and the baby boomers who are fast approaching retirement. Join our virtual community. Hit www.elderchicks.com on your computer keyboard.
Where heads of state, sports, entertainment, and political celebrities meet. You're listening to Armstrong Williams.
And welcome back to the broadcast, and thank you so much for joining us for this edition of the Armstrong Williams Show. Dr. Gary Bernard, how are you? Oh, now that's a little surprising that Dr. Bernard is not on the line. He's always on the line. Oh, it's interesting he's not there. Well, I guess he'll be on soon. Listen, so I want to talk about Dr. Gary Bernard's topic for today. He always comes up with these very interesting topics for us to discuss, and today is no different. He joins us every Monday at this time, and we always look forward to having him. You know, one of his favorite topics are stressful times, and there he is. Glad you decided to join us.
Hi, Armstrong.
How are you? Good. So this week was finished our Living in Stressful Times with part 3. Let's talk about it. Okay. No longer living in stressful times.
Well, we're working on managing that so that they're not as stressful as many times they can be. You know, we talked a little bit about relaxation response and how two things that are opposed to one another can't happen at the same time, reciprocal inhibition, all these things we've talked about help us. They're the principles involved, and they're very natural principles. They're a balancing kind of agent. And I wanted to talk about 2 specific studies that have just been published in the last month, and they're very interesting, and they fit nicely into what we're talking about. One of them has to do with children from ages 7 to 18, and there are about 800 of them. The Mayo Clinic did this study, and they developed 2 different questionnaires or surveys related to avoidance. And one of the surveys was a self-reporting from these children, and the other was from their parents. And so they questioned them about events that brought on fearful responses and how apt they were to, or how they would likely avoid that because of the fear. And so those measures, just one of the findings that was fascinating is just the amount that a child avoids predicted whether or not they would develop an anxiety disorder. Isn't that interesting?
No, that's more than interesting. That's fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. And so at the end of this time, what they did is they took 25 of these children that were highly anxious and had avoided a lot. They put them into a study where they were involved in cognitive behavioral therapy, which uses various things, but one of the things is exposure. So they were exposed to these things, maybe with their imagination at first and maybe in real life, but they were exposed to the stimuli that would elicit this fear response originally. Now, at the end of this study, guess what happened? They looked at the new ratings from the parents, and they had dropped by half. So it lets us know that avoidance is going to increase our anxiety, even though temporarily it decreases it. For example, we're at, here in San Antonio, at Six Flags or SeaWorld, and you want to ride the big roller coaster with your friends, but you're afraid, so you avoid it. Well, you feel good temporarily, but the next time you want to ride it, you're even more anxious because you have not been exposed to it and seen that you can actually manage that fear. And so this habit of avoidance for children and for adults is causative. We know this, but it is causative of anxiety. And it fits the model that we've known for some time, or believe that anxiety disorders, how they developed. And so it's really a nice study that kind of brings this home. Now, here's the next piece.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Well, I was going to move on to one other study.
Go
but
ahead,
this
please.
Is good if we need to go.
Please.
Okay, the second study involved women. 34 different women. Ohio University did this. And they took these 34 healthy young women, and they had them write out a script and then say this speech in front of two people sitting across the table from them in white lab coats with this stone-faced expression. And this speech was about why they should get this job that they were applying for. Now, it was a very stressful thing, but at the end of this, half of the 34 were asked to ruminate, keep thinking about or re-experiencing that stressful event of giving the speech. The other half were asked to think about something more neutral, like out sailing a ship, a sailboat, or taking a shopping trip at the grocery store, or things of that nature. And what they found is, at the end of a set time, the group that was ruminating had the same level of C-reactive protein release, their blood level, as those who had just finished giving the speech. So just imagining giving the speech raised this C-reactive protein level that is given off by the liver, and it's used to sort of fight inflammatory processes, infections, cancer, things like that. But it goes sky high when we're stressed out. And so that group that was asked to ruminate, it was the same level as if they were doing it. And it kept rising for an hour after they stopped thinking about the speech. The other group, however, that was asked to think about something more neutral, it went down to base level before they ever gave a speech. Now, this is real interesting because this has never been done before. It's a direct link with this marker variable, C-reactive protein, that is released under chronic stress. It's also released when we have infections, cancer, things like that. But it is directly related now to heart disease, increased blood pressure, dementia, all of these diseases, and aging. So can you imagine if we're walking around all day long, stressed out, ruminating about negative things, anxious kinds of things? This level stays very high, and it's very damaging to our tissue to have it that high. And so one of the reasons...
Talk about the deep-seated psychological impact it can have. and how it plays itself out?
Well, the deep-seated psychological impact is this creates more of the anxiety, and it sort of feeds on itself. And so before we know it, our natural tendency is to avoid anything that brings that on, yet we can't get rid of it in our head, so we keep ruminating on it, even when we're sitting down in our homes, even when we're sleeping. And so it's a really damaging kind of thing, psychologically, physically, and it takes so much energy to do this. To be anxious, and to be anxious for very long, puts us into an exhaustion kind of phase. And it literally takes a whole lot of our energy, and we only have so much energy every day. We have to go to sleep and eat and do things to recover or fill our tanks up again, and it's depleted very quickly if we have this chronic stress. So these are just fascinating kind of studies that drive home the point that, yes, we're living in stressful times. Technology, we have all these distracting things going on in our lives, but we have the tools, we have this natural tendency to be able to balance that out if we'll play by those rules. And one of the simple rules is do not avoid, but slowly expose yourself to these things over time. And we'll develop managing techniques, and the anxiety goes down.
Well, I'll tell you this. Doctor, explain to our audience, how do you go about doing your research and coming to your conclusions and testing this and the kinds of people that you sample and how you come up with your questions?
Well, I did not do this study, but the way they do it is they research the literature. There's a lot of literature out there, scientific literature, where people have done tons of studies. This one, however, was not correlational. It wasn't just saying, if you get anxious, if this group of people got anxious, then typically they got sick more often. This one specifically looked at an experimental design where they controlled for all the variables they could, and they were just measuring anxiety, the idea of ruminating that was anxious, and this blood serum level of a protein that's released that we know is not good to be released in those high levels chronically. And so the way they do it is they research this, and then they come up with this new design to keep digging at this and trying to get to it and be more specific with it. And this is literally the first published study that's ever done that.
You're listening to Dr. Gary Bernard. Our phone lines are open here on the Armstrong Williams Show at 866-6620 and 803-733-5620. We're talking about stress. You're welcome to call in and ask your question. You can also write us at info@rightsidewire.com. We'll be back.
Armstrong Williams returns in a moment.
Say bye-bye burgers, pass on the pizza, forget the francs. Anytime is party time. Discover Golden Cross's authentic Jamaican-style patties. Beef, chicken, vegetables, soya, spinach, and shrimp. Feast on our great taste sensations. Jerk chicken, oxtail, sliced fish, and much more. Savor the taste of the Caribbean. Only at a Golden Cross near you. A family tradition since 1949. GoldenCrossBakery.com.
For more information on the Armstrong Williams Show, please visit our new website at www.rightsidewire.com. There you can find his syndicated column archive, view live streams, and get your favorite conservative pundits' views on the current issues affecting the American people. From building wealth to foreign policy, stay connected with Armstrong Williams and his colleagues at the all-new www.rightsidewire.com.
Does your school, team, church, or charity need a new fundraiser? Do you need to work out of your home or part-time? Are you a small business that can use an additional revenue stream? Then you need Yellow Llama. Do you need affordable web services or tools to enhance your existing business? Are you a graphic artist who wants to create a revenue stream with your art but not get ripped off? Then go to www.yellowllama.com.
Anderson Brothers Bank, a family-owned and operated establishment that blends traditional personal service, local market awareness, and advanced technology to meet the financial needs of its customers. Visit abbank.com or call 843-464-6271 to see how they can assist you with your banking needs. Anderson Brothers Bank, celebrating 75 years of community banking, the way it should be. Stability right in your backyard since 1933.
America must change course if we hope to survive and save the American dream for our children and grandchildren. How do we fix Social Security and Medicare? How do we cut government spending? How do we reform health care? How do we simplify the tax code? The Heritage Foundation has a bold plan that tackles these tough problems using common sense solutions that leave partisan politics on the sidelines. Find out how we can save the American dream at savingthedream.org, paid for by the Heritage Foundation.
Join the millions of Americans who pursue one of our country's finest traditions, from hunting to sport shooting. Since 1871, the NRA has grown as a service organization involved in all aspects of shooting sports and is a proud defender of the Bill of Rights. Join today to begin taking advantage of exclusive membership offers and discounts, including up to $25,000 in insurance coverage. Contact the NRA today. Call 1-800-672-3888 or visit nra.org.
Where heads of state, sports, entertainment, and political celebrities meet. You're listening to Armstrong Williams.
And welcome back to the Armstrong Williams Show with our guest, Dr. Gary Bernard. 25 of the anxious children in the study were placed in cognitive therapy behavior, which uses exposure to the fear-producing stimuli, and the avoidance scores from the ratings of their parents dropped by half of the original. Could you talk about that in more detail?
Yes. So these are kids whose parents say, little Jimmy or little Susie, typically under X situation, whatever it might be, going to school the first day, whatever it might be, having to go up and pay someone to check out after they purchase something, they tend to avoid that. And so these ratings were establishing a baseline of these kids. These were high-avoiding children who also showed high anxiety, relatively high anxiety. So those 25 kids were put into this study where they were given cognitive behavioral therapy. Cognitive means thinking, the way we think. Behaving is, of course, how our thinking drives our behavior. So if our thinking is all messed up, erroneous, we're telling ourselves all these crazy, catastrophic things, then we tend to use our number one defense to that, which is avoidance. And sometimes we have to have that. It's kind of a natural thing. If we don't, we're going to be hurt, or we'll be killed, or something like that. The problem is, if we use that defense and use it almost, to the point where we never do anything else, then what happens is our anxiety goes up because we never learn that we're confident, we're capable, we're able to manage these fearful things. So these parents were asked then to, after the kids went through this therapy, to rate these children's tendency to avoid. And they also measured the anxiety level. And what happened is they were avoiding half as much as they were before they had that exposure treatment or therapy. See, and it's much like if you think about vaccines or a flu shot. Well, some of that virus is given in small quantities, so we're exposed to it, and our body then learns how to react to it and handle it and fight it off. It's that same concept of inoculation through exposure. If we don't get that, if we're robbed from that, either by our own choice in that we avoid and we're shy and withdrawn, or our parents don't encourage us and almost demand that, no, you must do this. If if that doesn't happen, then we create this habit. And it's just this automatic thing. Every time I start feeling a little anxious, I'm just going to walk away and avoid that. And I feel better, so it reinforces me using that defense. Avoid it. The problem is, the next time I need to get on the elevator or go check out and pay someone or speak to them or ride the roller coaster, I'm going to be even more nervous. So now what am I going to do? Well, it's not likely I'm going to do it. I'm going to avoid it again. And then and this is how anxiety disorders, full-blown anxiety disorders, this is how they're created. And then, if we're not careful, they're generalized to other relatively mild fearful situations, things that normally we would do no problem, like wake up and go to school. So now we have a child that has school refusal. It started with they don't want to get on a roller coaster or whatever, and now they're refusing to go to school, so they're socially withdrawing. And if we do that, we never develop skills. So that's the big thing, and it's a huge problem today, and this anxiousness then carries over into adult life, and we have these pretty pervasive, entrenched characteristics in how we deal with stress, and then we're also creating all these negative things in our body, chemicals, proteins, that are pretending like, or they believe, that we're under great threat. So they are released to go out and fight the infection. There's no infection there. This is a mental thing. And so it's no wonder why for years physicians, medical practices, would sort of track this, and between 75 and 85% of all doctors' visits were psychological, stress-related kinds of things. And so now we have all these autoimmune problems that have come on board. Chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, arthritis, lupus, all these other kinds of things. And they don't do well with stress. In fact, now we're seeing that stress can cause this. And so we really are in this situation all over the world, but especially in these Western countries like ours, where a lot of our medical bills are related to how we're just choosing to think and live and manage our life. And it affects every aspect of our life. Our
and
mentality,
when do you know in your life that routine is not going to improve in time soon unless you break the chain?
Nothing. You have to do something to break the chain. It's exactly right. And it takes some courage, yes. But the more you avoid and pull away from and you're not exposed to it, the harder it will be. So the idea here is all of us can slowly start exposing ourselves to more, get outside of our comfort zone, take some risk, step out, and encourage your kids. That's where this internal natural principle of autonomy comes from. This is what our great forefathers wrote about. Don't give up your self-determination, your autonomy. It's our supreme power. We just don't use it. It is incredibly powerful. We don't use it. We run from it. And we develop these bad habits, and then we're kind of stuck until we kind of crash and we say, oh, yeah, well, I guess we need to do something different. But then it's very difficult to change some of these things when we've been living our lives this way. Our children watch us as parents. They watch how we live our lives and how we manage stress. So it's a really powerful thing. There's a lot in the literature right now, and people will start seeing it. I've seen a few articles here and there, but we're going to see more of it, where we're not putting enough emphasis on managing our lives emotionally, physically, mentally, spiritually, in a more balanced fashion. And I don't think we have to quit exposing ourselves to technology and the news and all these things. I just think we have to manage it differently.
Well, if not,
what do you think about that?
Well, I think it's wonderful. It's either that or it's going to manage us. What demographic has made the most progress and why?
Well, that's interesting. I don't know that I've seen a study on exactly the demographic. I think people... That's a good question. People who are encouraged within their systems, at home and in school and their churches, to dream big, to take risks, yes, think about it, get all your ducks lined up, get people to support you. Those are the people that make the biggest changes. There's no doubt in my mind. They're used to problem solving and seeing people in their systems problem solving. They don't run from it. They bring it out and they say, okay, looks like we got a problem. What are we going to do about this? And then pull together as a team and they start trying things out. The more we're exposed to good information, the more we can cut down on that learning curve in our trial and error process. And we can develop some really good skills. Athletes do this because they have to perform well. You know, it's just an interesting population. Musicians, they have to do this. And, you know, some very anxious people are actors, musicians, athletes. But they've learned how to perform on stage, so to speak, when it's game time. And it has helped them in their lives. But they'll tell you they still struggle with other kinds of situations. But for the most part, if they didn't have that stage of exposure and learning how to do it, I think these would be people that were pretty much, paralyzed or disabled with their anxiety.
How can people get more information on you, Doctor?
You can go to the web, www.thepower-parent.com. And I'm having me a book signing, and I'm speaking more. I'm going to have a TV spot here in our city, starting to reach out, promoting the book, Becoming a Power Parent, 7 Guiding Principles to Create Healthy Families. And I would love to hear from people, either through your blog site, website, or calling us on this show, or email me through the website that I just gave. I would love to hear from people what they want to talk about. I'd like for us to get more discussion going, so if people aren't interested in what we're talking about, here's your chance. Call in with a topic. I'll be happy to research it, use whatever I know, and find out more, and we'll talk about it.
What's that website again?
www.thepower-parent.com.
Well, listen, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us, and
thank you. I enjoyed it.
Yes. Listen, you can always learn more by going to info@rightsidewire.com. We stream at www.livestream.com/Armstrong Williams. Coming up Thursday, Donald Trump will be our guest. Donald Trump's in the house. Yes, Donald Trump is our guest on Thursday. You don't want to miss this provocative show. Donald Trump. Talking about, we're starting a new series called the Entrepreneurial Class. That's right. All here on the Armstrong Williams Show. We got a blockbuster week for you. Horatio Alger Awards, National Association of Broadcasters coming up. It's just a blockbuster week on the Armstrong Williams Show. You don't want to miss it. Don't want to miss prime time. Listen, you can always give us a call at 1-866-620-6620. We'd love to hear from you. And 803-733-5620. We want to thank our flagship station, WGCV, Jamal, Yolanda, Alex, Tony, all the A-team. Thank you all so much for another edition of the Armstrong Williams Show.
Hello, everyone. This is Armstrong Williams on the right side. Don't try to speak English.